Hi, Mike Kennedy. I was watching this Sunday morning program again, and they lead out right out with a one-sided presentation of vaccines, and it's kind of like, uh, well, what is a vaccine? Vaccine is a substance you put into your system, and it kind of activates antibodies within you, so that when the real disease comes to you, you'll have those antibodies in your system already and fight off whatever it is. And they did a good piece about polio, talked about polio in the 50s, how that, the guy that invented it, saved so many people from being, hundreds of thousands of people from being crippled for life because of polio. Now, initially, they tried inoculating people with actual, fragments of polio virus from people, and it actually ended up hurting more people than it helped. But then, this thing gets refined into something that's grown in a laboratory, given to people, and it does a remarkable job, a miraculous job, you could even say. So this leads in with us doing other vaccines, childhood vaccines for measles, mumps, and everything. Like nowadays, have you even met someone that's had measles? If you're not my age, you might not even have ever met anyone that had measles at any point in their life. And but things start to change. They mention this study that was done, and it was published by a research place in England, I guess. And it linked vaccines to autism. Well, it took 13 years for the journal that published that article to really look back clearly at that original study and find out that the data was actually fake. So they promulgated this huge thing about autism when people were desperate to do something about autism, and they linked it with vaccines. So it made perfect sense. Someone's shooting something in you, your body's going haywire, and you get autism. Not true. Never has been. The people, some of the autism type people who support this idea of vaccines, they paid for, out of membership fees and everything, an individual test, a test just by scientists they picked to see if there was a correlation between autism and vaccines. And what did they find? There was no correlation. So here they had another study they had to try to refute because it showed there was no connections. Now, go off the track a little like I do so often. What are the modern theories of what caused autism? Well, it seems to be, I'm going to mention two things. Genetics and the second hit, okay? There's a belief now that autism is created by a set of genes. And the set is in one partner, and the rest of the set is in the other partner. They come together, and they produce a person with autism. And, of course, they have to combine, right? Sometimes maybe all of the things don't combine, just like you might have a child with brown eyes and one with blue eyes, or, different features. They not all, genetically perfectly similar. Your children's aren't. And with that theory, it would explain why you could have one autistic child and one who wasn't. Well, what they found was that people that were highly organized in certain career paths, when they married other people similar to them, they produced a greater number of autistic children. And it was funny because at the time I was working for this company, and I was working with a very high-functioning autistic person, and it fit the study exactly. The father was an engineer, the woman was a doctor, and that gene set, came together, and they had an autistic child and a normal child. The first one wasn't autistic, the second one was. So now you got to look at there's a second, though, theory that can go with this or by itself. It's called the second hit. In other words, someone can inherit the genes for something, but they don't get switched on or messed with, or however you want to say that, so that what has to happen is a second effect. So in other words, what's the second effect? It could be that the woman pregnant with a child with that set of genes encounters some type of virus. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that would make her so sick she ended up in the hospital. Or it could be some other environmental factor. But that acts with these genes and produces an autistic child. And so, anyway, those, if you want to know what's really up with science, that's what science found out, is that there's most likely a genetic base. They haven't sorted that all out. And because it could be multiple different genes that connect in multiple different ways. But that's the theory now. And why are there so many autistic people now? Well, two reasons. If you're one of these other disorders like Asperger's, you didn't get funding for your children, just the autistic children did. So there was purposely a misclassification to put all of these children in as autistic because they could get funding for the education, whatever else they needed. So they were purposely misclassified. That was told to me by a psychiatrist who I think knows what he was talking about. And so also, though, when we talked about these genes, you figure, just look at people. How do they mate? Well, they meet someone, marry them, and have children. Or sometimes don't marry them and have children. But how do they meet the person? Well, it used to be, it would have to be someone in your town, your village or whatever that you came in contact with. Maybe someone you met in school. Maybe someone you met in college. Maybe you're, going to the bar scene, going different places. Maybe you're going to church looking for someone. But, these would have been all the normal places that you might encounter someone who later would become your mate. Well, the internet changed a lot of that. Now, with some of these dating services, you can be really specific. And so if, you're this professional person, let's say I'm an engineer, I'm making $150,000 a year, and I'm looking for a wife. And it's like, I can go on there and say, well, she has to be, at least she has to be under my height. And we'll say I'm 6 feet. She has to be under 6 feet. She has to weigh this. She has to have this education, this experience, and she has to be making this much money. And you run that through the internet, and bloop, that person would come out. There's so many people in these things that you could do a very specific sorting. And what is happening then is that these people with one set of the autistic genes are being attracted and finding the person with the other set of genes. They come together and they mate and they produce autistic children. And like I say, before that, if you were a doctor in Maine, you wouldn't necessarily know that there was this woman in Wyoming that you thought would be a perfect mate. Okay, so that's just one of the things. So anyway, that's been disproven. So then they say, which I think is true, but they went the wrong direction with it, that vaccines became political. And it's like, oh boy, did they do. If you remember the original, which I watched, the original announcement by Trump, that he initiated this program called Warp Speed. In other words, and he's doing this with medical advisors. He's not like a medical person. He isn't making this stuff up. He's got these advisors and he's, taking their information and formulating a plan, or they're formulating it and he's passing it on. And so he decides to have a program where we're going to cut some of the basic necessities of testing because this COVID is so bad and it's going to come to the U.S. And they have computer modeling that says 2 million people are going to die if they don't do anything. Well, they did something and 2 million people died anyway. Maybe it would have been a lot more if they hadn't done anything. But the original statements by the FDA didn't like that at all. They did not like that Trump was cutting the plans so that he could get, a vaccine in a few months instead of a few years. And, how do they make vaccines? Well, they take this active part of the virus, or, they inject it into something living, sometimes eggs, sometimes goats, and, or cattle or whatever. They collect things from them, fluid, blood, purify it, and they get these antibodies out. And that's what kind of makes up the vaccine, or this piece of the virus that's been replicated in that living situation. They pull that out and they give it to you. So it takes a long time, and it doesn't take just a long time to produce it. It takes a long time to test it. So that cut a big lot. And, the first indication that this was going to be very politically and anti-Trump was the people who got the first virus vaccine with this program that Trump started purposely waited till the day after elections to say that they had it. They waited 24 hours just so that wouldn't provide him a bump when people were voting. And it just got worse as things went on. Trump mentioned something, and again, he's not a medical person. He said things that were wrong about the virus, but he did mention several things that were working in other countries. They got immediately blacklisted by everyone. In Maine, if you used certain medicines that were safe, they use them all the time for other things, for COVID, our governor promised that you would lose your license to practice medicine. And this was going on in other states too. So it was like you mean, if it works in Mexico or Canada or France, it doesn't work in Maine? What's that about? Just foolishness, political stuff. So, we have that. But then they're worrying in this article about there's a rise in measles. And again, measles, they can be really nasty. Especially men getting measles as adults, it can be deadly. You can die from it. And so there's an uptake in measles now. And why is it? People aren't getting their children vaccinated. They're sending them to school without the proper vaccinations. And even though I don't know if it was Supreme Court or whatever, but they mandated that the government could require vaccines for children to enter school. But, there's certain exemptions, religious exemption, whatever, different things. And, people aren't that religious now, so they have other types of exemptions. But what's that done is we're finding more of these childhood diseases manifesting themselves. And so why are people not doing vaccines? Well, I think some of it's because of the pandemic that was handled so poorly. A lot of the science that we got from Mr. Science even was wrong. He came out later and said it was wrong. The 6-foot distancing, that was made up. The masks, they had no real understanding that would help. In retrospect, they realized that keeping kids home from school created more harm in children than having them in school with the possibility of catching COVID. So, you get all these things like, it seems, what do you mean? They didn't tell us the truth? Well, no, they didn't. In different ways, that breeds a certain skepticism among people. And so now those people, they aren't just saying, well, I don't like the COVID virus because blah, blah, blah. They're like, I don't like any viruses. And it's like, come on. You want your kid to have polio? You want people to die of measles again? I mean, come on. These other vaccines are absolutely proven with, millions of uses to be incredibly effective. And all the studies have never indicated a connection with autism at all. Now, people will say, oh, no, it doesn't. What are they talking about? Some doctor that, used 3 of them and 2 of the kids were autistic or something. It's like, no, any real scientific studies have not shown a link. But I think what's happened is people have lost faith in the medical community and in the government. And so what do they do then? They fall back into these little, maybe conspiracy theories or whatever, or just, oh, I don't trust it, I'm not going to do it. And, the children pay. And, the adults will pay later. And there's something, too, about, they were saying, like, well, just, if you want vaccines, get them. And don't force it on us with our kids going to school. And it's like, well, there's something called herd immunity. And so we have this class say, one kid doesn't get vaccinated. Then eventually we have one with 15 kids don't get vaccinated. And all of a sudden what we find is some of those kids are getting measles, but the vaccinated kids suddenly are getting measles too. And they've never got them when there was only one kid that wasn't vaccinated. Well, this herd immunity means that you have to have enough people vaccinated or the disease kind of gets strong in that group and will affect, or I should say infect, people with the vaccine, and they'll get the illness. So, and as an example, I know about, this. I help a family out in Haiti, and the kid who had been vaccinated against measles got a really, really bad case of measles. He had to go to the hospital and things. And why is that? Was the vaccine he got bad? Well, I suppose that could be possible, but more likely that, I can't imagine what percent of children in Haiti have no vaccinations whatsoever. And so getting the vaccination at that level of just being maybe say it's a few percent isn't necessarily going to help you a lot from not getting measles. You can have a lot of the children vaccinated to bring that about. So to wrap back up again, vaccines are really good. They've proven their use. Some of them have years and years of data that shows how effective they are. And no matter what you want to think, there's no link between autism and vaccines at all. But the government and scientists kind of botched the presentation of this COVID vaccine, and they lost the confidence of the American people. They have to get it back somehow. But, railing against anti-vaxxers, I don't think is going to help it at all. So that's where we stand. People, I would say you definitely want to get your children to have all the classical vaccines they can get, unless you want your child to have, polio, maybe measles or some other childhood disease that could take the life of your child or permanently scar them for life. We had this one, there's a guy at our church, he's died since, but he was like 93, but he had gotten polio as a young person, and when he got older, the symptoms in his legs returned. That certain strength he had as a younger person, that he could counteract some of the polio type things, because he had a period where he appeared to be completely free of polio, remanifests himself as he's this older, 80-plus-year-old adult. All of a sudden, he's having these troubles with his legs that he distinctly remembers him having as a young person when he originally caught the polio. So, there it is. Comment and see what people say. Bye.